Okay, so good evening, everybody, and welcome back. We're now holding part 2. This is a part 2 Passover in the Talmud series, and tonight's title is Holy Cup. Holy Cup. Talking about the significance, the topic, and the focus tonight is the 4 cups of wine. As we get closer to Pesach, we're talking about Pesach, Passover themes. So last week was talking about instilling holiday joy, getting rid of the Pesach blues perspective. Tonight we get into the seder night. Tonight's focus is the 4 cups of wine. Next week will be about the Passover signature sandwich, and followed by the third, the week afterwards, which is Monday night, not Thursday night, where we talk about provoking proverbial questions. Say that 10 times backwards.
I love it.
Okay, so like I said, tonight's focus is the 4 cups of wine.
Yeah.
And you have the handouts.
You don't have?
For those who have the handouts in front of me, we're going a little back towards our traditional Talmud classes, where we have a page in the Talmud, or photocopy handouts from the English translated art scroll. So tonight, we are going to be focusing on 2 things. We're going to be talking about the significance of the 4 cups, so that's the topic. And then the implications, based on the discussion that we have inside the Talmud, about the different requirements that we need to have when drinking the 4 cups of wine. So we're talking about the significance of it and the halachic practical implications. Those are the 2 main things that we're going to focus on tonight. So the first part 1, the significance. So I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction by telling you the significance of the 4 cups of wine and what they correspond to that are not mentioned in the Talmud, what we're about to address tonight. The Talmud gives us the reasonings. We're going to find out reasonings for the 4 cups of wine. Why do we drink 4 cups of wine at the seder table? The Talmud gives us reasonings. So I'm going to give an introduction by presenting you various reasons that are not mentioned in the Talmud. So there are many. Basically, that's the point I'm presenting to all of you tonight, in the opening of tonight's class. There are many reasons given for the 4 cups of wine. And so here are some reasons that are not mentioned in the Talmud, but based on Medrash and other commentaries. One reason given is corresponding to the 4 iconic themes that we have by the Seder table. Meaning, we have 2 primary biblical commandments that we have to do on the Seder night, which are the telling of the story of going out of Egypt. That is a mitzvah. In fact, before we got into the Purim and Passover series, one of the last things that we discussed in Tractate Brachos was this concept of the biblical commandment to talk about going out of Egypt, where we discussed that it wasn't just a biblical commandment on the Seder night, but namely it was a commandment that we must do each and every day. We quoted a Mishnah. This was one of the last classes we had in Tractate Brachos before we went into this season. That we actually quoted a Mishnah that is quoted in the Haggadah about this commandment. So in order that you shall remember the days that you went out of Egypt, all the days of your life, and we brought Ben Zayma, Chachamim, the 2 opinions of what that's referring to. That's referring to the daytime and the nighttime, each and every day, each and every night. And we discussed how we fulfill that. We fulfill that through the recitation of the Shema. In the 3rd paragraph, when we say, Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher etzesi eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim, I am Hashem your God, who took you out of Egypt. When we say that, when we declare that in the Shema in the morning and in the evening, we fulfill that commandment. At any rate, so we have that commandment. Then another commandment that we have, a biblical commandment from the Torah, is, of course, the eating of the matzah. So those are the 2 biblical commandments. Then we have rabbinical commandments, like drinking the 4 cups of wine, like eating the maror, eating the bitter herbs. Now, by the way, eating the bitter herbs is mentioned in the Torah as well. However, it's only mentioned in the Torah in regards to the very first Passover Seder only, meaning the night before the Jewish people were actually freed from Egypt. They actually ate the Paschal lamb for the very first time, and they ate it together with matzah and maror. It says in Parshas Bayit, Al matzah simrorim yechlu, that they ate it with matzah and they ate it with bitter herbs, with maror. So they ate it then. However, nowadays we do not have this biblical commandment to eat the bitter herbs. It was only back then. The rabbis have instituted, so it's a rabbinical commandment to eat the bitter herbs. And then another thing that we have is leaning. This concept that we leaning by the seder table, basically showing on the idea of royalty. So, if I'm to summarize that, we have four main things that we have at the seder table, namely the paschal lamb, the matzah, the maror, and leaning, which categorically represents our attitude that night, where we behave like royalty. So these four items, that's why we have the number 4 cups. Another reason given is that it corresponds to the 4 mothers, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Another reason, these are all reasons not mentioned in the Talmud I'm presenting to you tonight. Another reason given is that it corresponds to the 4 exiles that we've experienced throughout history, including the one that we are still presently in. The very first exile was Egypt, and we were freed. The second was Paras Umadai, the Persian exile. If you know that the story of Purim was part of the Persian exile. It was Galus Bavel, Babylon, that became the Persia and Media, Paras Umadai. That's a second exile, and we were freed from that. Just 3 years after the story of Purim. 3 years later, when Esther's son, Daryavish II, Darius, as he's known, at the tender age of 4 years old, became the king. King Ahasuerus, by the way, died right after the story of Purim. Didn't live too much longer. Died 2 years later. At the young age of 4 years old, Daryavish becomes king, and he was instrumental in helping build the second temple, the second Beis HaMikdash. So we were freed. We were freed from then. The third exile was the Greek exile, Galus Yavan. The story of Hanukkah took place during that time, the Assyrian Greeks. And then the fourth exile, which began 100 years after the story of Hanukkah, when the newly elected Jewish empire led by the Chashmonaim, subsequently to the story of Hanukkah, they were beginning to lose control, so they asked the Romans to come and help them, which was a terrible mistake, because the Romans came in and basically seized power, and leading to the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, and that is commonly known as Galus Edom, the exile of Edom, and we are still in that exile today. So why do we celebrate 4 cups corresponding to the 4 exiles? What's the meaning of that? Very simple. The same way we were freed from Egypt, from the Persians, and from the Greeks, so too we will be freed from Galus Edom with the coming of Mashiach. So we are celebrating that. Just as we celebrate, even though the primary focus is of going out of Egypt. That's the main focus of the first days. It's only the last days of Passover that we focus on our final redemption, but we are already celebrating it to a point when drinking the 4th cup of wine. 4 cups of wine. And after all, we finish the seder saying, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Okay, so I presented to you other reasons given for drinking the 4 cups of wine. So obviously there's a significance to that. And so with that being said, I'm going to go right into the Talmud by introducing to you first a Mishnah that is not in the handout in front of you. This is the very first Mishnah of the 10th chapter of Tractate Psachim. The Gemara Psachim, which is the tractate of the Talmud, which talks about Passover, Pesach. And this is a very famous chapter, because this is the chapter that talks about all the mitzvahs in regards to the Seder night, etc., etc. So this chapter is commonly known as Perek Arvei Psachim, the evening of Pesach, evening of Passover, and that's the Mishnah I'm going to quote to you today, and then lead you right into the Talmud that you have in front of you. Says the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, the opening Mishnah. Arvei Psachim, the eve of Pesach. This is referring to the night before the onset of Passover. Samach Mincha, close to the afternoon prayer of Mincha. La yechal adam ad shetechshach, a person is not allowed to eat from the afternoon, this is Erev Pesach, the day before Pesach, a person is not allowed to eat anything from midday onwards. Why? The commentaries explain it is in order to build an appetite, for the purpose of building an appetite for the Seder night. Afilu ani should be Yisrael, even if the person is poor. Commentaries explain what that means is poor, that he doesn't know when the next piece of bread is going to arrive. Even a poor person should not lo yochel ad sheyesef, should not eat at all in the afternoon until he mesubin, until he celebrates. Okay, that's the first part. Now here's the second part, which is going to be our focus for tonight. Even the poor person should not drink any less than 4 cups of wine. Even if that poor person is so poor that he relies on the soup kitchen, that he cannot even afford to buy his own food, and he usually relies eating from the soup kitchen, from the local soup kitchen, even such a poor person must drink 4 cups of wine, cannot drink any less on the evening of Pesach, on the Seder night. Says Rashi, foremost commentary. Again, this is not the handout in front of you. This is the Mishnah, which is actually 10 pages earlier, but you'll see why I'm quoting this. Says Rashi, the foremost commentary explained to us the Talmud. Why do we make such an emphasis on the 4 cups of wine, that even a poor person who's reliant on the soup kitchen normally throughout the entire year, why do we require the poor person to drink 4 cups of wine? And needless to say, the rest of us, who thank God are not relying, I hope, are not relying on the soup kitchen. Says Rashi the reason why, and he says it is because over here, suddenly I don't see it. Here. Says Rashi, the reason, because Rabba b'shem Rabba keneged arba l'sheni geula. Rashi says the reason why we must drink 4 cups of wine, as he explains over there, is because it is corresponding to 4 expressions of redemption. In fact, all the reasons I gave to you until now are all metaphorical reasons. The primary reason is the reason given to us at the opening mission of Tractate Pesachim, and that is we have 4 expressions of redemption, namely Vahitzesi, Vehitzalti, V'ga'alti, V'lakachti, Beparshas Va'era, as is mentioned in the Torah portion of Va'era. And that is, there are 4 expressions. By the way, this is even before Moshe Rabbeinu, even before Moses carries out the 10 plagues, and the Jewish people are redeemed. Before that, God's already giving Moshe what to look forward to tell the Jewish people what to look forward to, by telling them our 4 expressions of redemption, Vahitzesi, and I will take you out. Vahitzesi eschem mitacha silvos Mitzrayim, I'm going to take you out from the afflictions of Egypt. Then, Vehitzalti eschem me'avedasam, I'm going to save you from all of its work. V'ga'alti eschem, I'm going to redeem you. And then v'lakachti eschem li la'am, and I'll take you to me as a nation. So these 4 expressions, v'hotzesi, I'll take you out. V'hitzalti, I will save you. V'ga'alti, I will redeem you. V'lakachti, I will take you. These 4 expressions, we correspond, therefore we have these 4 cups of wine. Ended. Now let's go to our Gemara. For those who have the handouts, Kuf Ches Amud Aleph, 108 side A, and we are starting literally on the last line, the very last line. For those of you who have the English handouts on the front page, it is on the right hand side, the bottom 3 lines. So basically, the handout you see in front of you, we're focusing literally on the last line. Very good. Very strongly infused. Okay. This Talmud is going to introduce this concept to us by bringing to us the laws, how it applies to women. The Talmud is telling us now, are women obligated in drinking 4 cups of wine? That's the opening Talmud I'm presenting you tonight. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Says Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Nashim chayaves, ba'arba'a kaisis halalu. Women are obligated, yes, they are obligated in drinking the 4 cups of wine. Why? Next page. 5 words in. Sha'af hein hayu ba'isei hanes. Because they too were part of the miracle. Okay. So there's a lot to speak about this phrase by itself. Rashi tells us, why do we say that the women are obligated to drink 4 cups of wine? Rashi says like this, fascinating. Why are they obligated to drink 4 cups of wine? Because, says Rashi, Arba kaises, 4 cups, Shleisha keneged gimel kaises, shenemru b'pasuk zeh, v'kais pare biyadi, v'goymer v'revi birchas hamozeh. Rashi says something mind-boggling. Rashi says, you want to know the reason why women are obligated to drink 4 cups of wine? Because 3 of those cups correspond to Joseph's dream. In Joseph's dream, not Joseph's dream, but a dream that Joseph interpreted. We know, for those who know a little bit, there is a story. Joseph, sold by his brothers, ended up in Egypt. He was the wife of Potiphar, his owner, who bought him, basically tried to seduce him. He ran away. He did not listen to her. She created a libel. The owner Potiphar threw him into prison. He was in prison for many years. He was in the royal prison. This is the government prison. And so therefore it came as no surprise when 2 members of the king of Pharaoh's palace were thrown into prison alongside him, and they were namely the butler and the baker. Now the butler and the baker had dreams. They had dreams themselves. The butler's dream was what? I was standing in front of Pharaoh. There was 3 clusters of grapes, and I squeezed those grapes into Pharaoh's cup, and I handed it to Pharaoh. And then the baker said, I had a dream also. I had 3 baskets of, these 3 baskets were on my head. On these baskets were bread. And then the birds swooped in and ate from the top basket. Joseph interpreted these dreams for them. Butler, in your dream, when you squeeze 3 clusters of grapes, that corresponds to 3 days. In 3 days from now, Pharaoh is going to restore you back to your original position. You'll be acquitted. You'll be innocent, declared innocent. And for the baker, he says, 3 baskets represents 3 days as well. The bird swooped in and ate from the top basket, meaning in 3 days from now, you are going to be hanged. You're going to be hanged. And some commentaries even say v'talu, I say, like literally impaling. If you want to know what that means, look it up. I'm not going to say it here. And the birds are going to eat of your flesh. And that's what happened. Says Rashi here, 3 clusters of grapes into Pharaoh's cup. That's why we drink 3 cups of wine. What about the 4th? Birchas hamazon. We have to have grace after meals. Anyways, whenever you have grace after meals, you can ask Penny this. Every time you have a kiddush and you have a lot of people gathered together, and then you have benching, you have birchat hamazon, grace after meals, you're supposed to do it with a zimun, with at least 3 people. You do it over a cup of wine. So says Rashi, why do we have 4 cups of wine? 3 corresponding to the 3 clusters of grapes mentioned in the butler's dream that Joseph interpreted. And the 4th one, because we need a cup anyways to have grace after meals. So first of all, before we try to explain this explanation compared to the last one, let's first, it's interesting to point out how metaphorically we are comparing the exodus from Mitzrayim to dreams, exile to dreams. So we have 4 cups of wine. What are we celebrating? We're celebrating the exodus out of Mitzrayim, Egypt. And it's interesting that in comparison, we draw comparisons from dreams. Now, usually dreams usually dreams are illogical. They make no sense. Right? The Talmud tells us that a dream, an elephant can fit through an eye of a needle, eye of a sow's needle. Dreams themselves make no sense, and we know that. It's not uncommon that someone will say, "I had this very strange dream, and in this dream, yada 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 happened." Would it make sense that someone would come over to him and say, "No, what are you talking about? That doesn't make sense. Why would that make sense?" No, we don't get into whole arguments about how something makes sense in the dream, because it's a dream. We take it for granted that things are illogical. So the truth is that this, if you think about it, it actually gives us perspective into how we treat galut, how we treat exile in the first place. How everything is one big dream, and everything is not as we see it. We discuss this at length in our Purim in the Talmud series. Not everything is as we see it, and sometimes we see the hidden hand only after the fact. And that's how we should approach exile in the first place. So with that being said, okay. However, now we have a question. Now we have a question. What's our question? Our question is, we just said 10 pages ago, what is the reason for the 4 cups of wine? The 4 expressions of redemption. And now suddenly, Rashi gives us a completely different answer. It's the same guy, Rashi. He just gave us 10 pages earlier one explanation, one reasoning for the 4 cups of wine, 4 expressions of redemption. Now he gives us a different reason. What happened? Lost our memory? What happened to the last one? Was that not good enough? So this question is presented by many, many commentaries. I'm going to present you one, the Ar Chadash. And he says something interesting. He says as follows. He says, we must understand where does the number 4 come in? We have to first understand, how do we get to the number 4? Because after all, it's usually the number 3 that's very, very often associated with Judaism in general. And after all, we have to understand Pesach, Passover, is the Jewish July 4th. What are we really celebrating on Pesach? We're celebrating the birth of the Jewish nation. When we were freed from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, that's when we were born as a Jewish nation. That's when the nation was born. It's our July 4th. It's our Jewish July 4th, if you think about it. So it's a celebration. Now usually, generally in Judaism, we associate with the number 3. We had just mentioned Zimun, that grace after meals is done with 3 people. After Passover, we immediately begin counting, going to receive the Torah after 49 days. What is the Torah? It's comprised of 3 things: Torah, Nevi'im, and Kesubim. It was given to us in the 3rd month, the month of Sivan. It is given to the Jewish people, which are comprised of 3: Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. It is given. We prepared for the giving of the Torah on the 3rd day, etc., etc. Chazaka, the concept of acquiring an object. One of the ways, there are 3 different ways of taking ownership over an object. One of the ways is chazaka. If you hold on to it for 3 years straight, for example, if someone enters into a property and they live in that property for 3 years, then we have the concept of chazaka. The ownership takes value. So we have this concept of 3. And of course, we have on the seder night, we eat 3 matzahs. So where does this number 4 come in? 4 is unusual. We don't usually focus on 4. I mean, I just told you a whole bunch of reasons. The only one that seems to stick is the 4 mothers. But besides for that, in Judaism, we don't have this concept of 4. So therefore, Rashi tells us, you want to know the reason we have 4? Exception to the rule. Because we're focusing on redemption, God redeeming us. And there were 4 expressions of Geula. Right. Okay, so now we understand where we get the number 4, because usually 4 is usually it's an unusual number. The Ar Chadash tells us, however, the one question that still escapes us is, why wine? That's where Rashi's getting at. Want to know why Rashi gave us a different explanation? Because that 4 expressions of redemption did not explain to us why we're using cups and why we are drinking wine. Because after all, if we're talking about redemption, God redeeming us, the best thing to do is matzah. We should eat 4 matzahs. I'm not going to get into 4 bitter herbs. People probably might not like that too much. But 4 matzahs, that makes sense. That's corresponding. That's showing redemption, God redeeming us. Why is that showing us redeeming us? The first day of Passover, we read in the Torah, when the Jewish people left Egypt, they didn't have enough time for the dough to rise, and the matzah was baked on their backs. So if there's anything that shows us about redemption, it's the matzah. Where's wine come in? Suddenly wine. Says the Aruch Hadash, now we understand. Because when we associate redemption, we also associate with wine. Why? When did the real exodus from Egypt really begin? It began with Joseph, right? He was a slave in Egypt too. He was also a slave. He experienced the first Jewish experience of redemption in Egypt began with Joseph. When he interpreted the butler's dream. That's where it all began. It all began then. You know, again, we're mirroring the Purim in the Talmud series now. When I said, when did the Purim miracle really begin? When Esther made her move. When did Passover really begin? When did the first Jewish redemption really begin in Egypt? When Joseph made the move to ask the butler and baker, Lama pneichem zayafim hayom? Why rayim hayom? Why your face? He asked them, what's wrong? Why are you feeling down today? So he interpreted their dreams, which in turn caused the butler to mention Joseph's name in front of Parai, and the rest is history. Joseph became the viceroy of Egypt. So the first Jewish experience of redemption happened with Joseph's dream. And it was associated with what? With wine. With the cup. As we say, as the expression goes, we say it, there's a verse we all know, Kos Yeshuas Esa. With redemption, I will lift up a cup. So a cup specifically represents the redemption part. This explains it. Now, why women? Why are women obligated? Because they too were part of the miracle. Taisvus over here has a fundamental question. The Meiri asks this as well. A fundamental question. Aren't women not obligated in the performance of mitzvahs in general? We generally know that women are exempt from any mitzvah that is time bound. Mitzvah saseh shazman groma. Mitzvah that's time bound. Right? So they're usually exempt unless we include them for a specific reason. Says Tosfos, why do we even have this approach in asking whether women are obligated or not? We must understand drinking cups of wine, is it a biblical or rabbinical? It's a rabbinical commandment. It's not even a biblical commandment. So where does this question even enter? It's one thing if it's a biblical commandment and we are asking, are women obligated or not? But the question doesn't even enter this discussion because we would only enter that discussion in when we are talking about biblical commandments and women are exempt from it. But this is not even a biblical commandment, drinking 4 cups of wine. So why do we even have this question in the first place? Where does it enter? Says Tosfos, and this is a fundamental, we call this a yesod, a foundation, a fundamental principle throughout Talmud and throughout halacha, Jewish law, that any time the rabbis institute something, they always do it ke'ein dairaisa tiknun. They always institute it based on biblical. They use the same style, the same approach, and they use the same parameters. So the rabbis are basing this off the Torah. That's the seder night, basing off the Torah. And so they instituted 4 cups of wine in a way in a similar fashion to that of everything else, the Torah, and the Torah's approach in general. Just want to say, on a side note, an example. I'll just give you a practical example now that we're talking about wine. There's a concept, yayin nesach. You're not allowed to drink wine from an idol worshiper, a person who worships idols. Now the rabbis instituted an additional rule that not just when we're talking about yayin nesach, That's generally wine that you're not allowed to drink from a person who worships idols. We go a step further and they say yain stam. Any wine that's belonging to a person who is not Jewish, you're not supposed to share wine with them. Why? Nothing to do with idol worship, but everything to do with sharing drinks. There's a concept that you're not supposed to share drinks. Why? Because we're not allowed to intermarry, and there's a problem. Wine is different than other beverages. Other beverages usually you could serve even in a can, right? Even beer, you serve in a can, you serve in a drink. Throw me a beer, drink out the door. No one ever saw wine in the can. Wine is a whole different caliber, right? You don't just say, wine. You want wine? Okay, just pour me in a little paper cup while I run out the door to work. No, it's not proper etiquette. That's not how we drink wine. Wine is a whole different thing. When you're sharing wine, when you're drinking wine, it's a whole thing. You sit down and you drink a glass of wine. On the glass, usually. And you share it with somebody, and there's an emotional draw to this experience of sharing wine with somebody. It has more importance to it. So when sharing wine, it creates more closer, more intimate relationships. That's the characteristics of wine. So that's a rabbinical institution, wine in general. Where does this rule not apply? When wine is, I think the modern term is pasteurized, when it's mevushal, when it's cooked, so to speak, when it goes past a certain temperature, I think it's 200. I did wineries. I believe it's 202. Some say what?
210 is boiling.
210 is boiling. So there's 202. So it's not boiling, but just under that is the more stricter standard. And then once it passes that stage, then we have no problem. We don't say that there's any problem. You could even share wine, even if that draws any type of relationship or creating any bond. We don't put any rules on the yain mevushal. Why? What happened to the rules? What happened to the logic? So this is the point I'm driving at. The rabbis only felt that they had a license to do something within the parameters of what the Torah defines as wine. And the Torah defines as wine a certain parameter. Non-mevushal wine is considered as such. So the rabbis did not feel that they had the liberty to create new standards that was not within the fashion of the Torah. So that's why yain mevushal does not fall onto that parameters, and therefore the rabbis did not see it that they had the legal rights to touch yain mevushal, cooked wine, and therefore they left that alone. The reason why I'm bringing this is just to bring out the point that anything that the rabbis institute, they instituted within the parameters of the Torah and using the Torah fashion. Now, what does it mean? They too were included in the miracle. Now, usually the expression when they too are included in the miracle, that means that they are secondary to somebody else. Think about the Hebrew expression, afhein, they too were part of the miracle. So that means that they are secondary to somebody else. To who? The men? Face value. Afhein. So Rashi tells us, they too were part of the miracle. Says Rashi, quoting a Talmud in Saita, that Beschar Nashim Tzidkanya Sheba'isi Hadar Nigalo. The Talmud tells us in Tractate Sota, it was actually the merit of the righteous women that we were redeemed from Egypt. Beschar Nashim Tzidkanyat. And he goes even further. We just left Purim. V'chein Mikra Megillah Nami. If you remember in the Purim in the Talmud series, we have this concept as well, where we said that the women are obligated to hear the reading of the Megillah also. Why? Because they also were part of the miracle. Why? We explained there because of Queen Esther. She was the heroine of the day. V'chein Gabi Ner Chanukah. And so too by the story of Chanukah, we also say that they have to, because they were part of the miracle. For example, we have the story of Yehudis. Yehudis, she was instrumental in her city, that she broke enemy lines, went to the Greek general Holofernes, got him completely drunk, chopped his head off, and basically she was instrumental in saving her city, her township. So the women were involved. But we have to understand where this is coming from, because how are they involved in the story of going out of Mitzrayim, going out of Egypt? And what does it mean that they only take a secondary role? Now, it's true that some commentaries explain that the women did not have such a pivotal role in the slavery in Egypt. The men were getting harder, backbreaking labor than the women. But not all agree to that. So, I'm going to quote to you now Rashba, Meiri, that tells us as follows. What does it mean when we say they too are part of the miracle? We're not degrading them in any way. The truth is, we are saying that they have more merit than the men. And here's why. The truth is, whose true merit is it that we are redeemed? Not necessarily the men, but in the merit of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. In fact, when the Torah first says that the Jewish people, after 86 years of backbreaking labor, cried out to God to save them, by Yitzhaku El Hashem, they cried out to God. What did God do right then? The Torah tells us, by Yiskar es brisa Avram Yitzchak Yaakov, he remembered his covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In fact, he told Moses that. Asher nishbati la'Avram Yitzchak Yaakov v'eser shvatim. I remembered my covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and therefore I'm going to be making wonders, and we take the Jews out of Egypt. So whose merit is it? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Oh, their merit that we're going out of Egypt. Furthermore, elsewhere the Medrash tells us the truth is the merit of Moses, Moshe, and his brother Aaron, the merit of those two people alone were enough to carry the merit of the entire Jewish nation. So Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, plus Moshe and his brother Aaron, those 5 characters, those 5 personalities, they themselves were already sufficient that we would have been redeemed out of Egypt. On this the Talmud tells us, Af hein hayubaysanes. Not just Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, and his brother Aaron carried the merit of going out of Egypt, but the women as well. No mention of the men. The women, B'schus b'schar nashim tzekanias nigalu. It was the merit of the women of Egypt that we are redeemed from Mitzrayim, alongside the merit of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our leader, and his brother Aaron. So a select few men, and the women of Egypt, they carry the going out of Egypt. So that's the meaning of the Talmud. Af ein anas. They too were part of the miracle, and that is why, says Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that is why women are certainly obligated in drinking 4 cups of wine, because now, based on the commentaries, now that makes a lot of sense. Not only do they get credit, they played a pivotal role in the reason why we were redeemed in the first place. Okay, I'm going to go a little faster because I want to move to the bottom half of this page. And we're going to see, we're entering now part 2. So we started off the class saying that there's 2 parts I'm going to focus on. The significance of the 4 cups of wine. So now we understand. I presented to you 6 different reasons for, and the significance and the importance of drinking 4 cups of wine. Now we're going to go into part 2, talking about the practical halachic implications and what is required in drinking these 4 cups of wine. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, we're now holding the top line of Kuf Ches Amud Beis, page 108, side B. Says the Talmud Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Arba Klesis Halal Tzach Sheheban Kedei Bezigas Kais Yafe. Says Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, these 4 cups that we are required to drink on the night of Pesach, it is required that we have to have at least a mixture of a good cup. What does this mean? Says Rashi, explains to us. Because, what does it mean, a mixture? Mezika, a mixture. Rashi tells us, in those days, especially in those days, wine by itself was not drinkable. It was not drinkable. Why? Back in those days, wine was like a paste. It was like a paste, a very thick syrup. Yes, we can definitely relate to it in modern terms. It's like concentrate. It's like concentrate. Wine used to be like a concentrate, and it was very, very thick like a syrupy, and it was basically undrinkable on its own. How did it work? Says Rashi. They used to mix it up. They used to mix it up. Revius lug de chamra. They used to mix it one part and 3-part water. So it was mixed into a quarter with 1 part wine, syrup, wine concentrate, we can loosely translate it, and 3 parts water. That was the extent. And so says the Talmud, in order to fulfill, it has to be minimum 1/4 wine to 3 parts water to be considered drinking the 4 cups of wine. Shasan chai, if a person drinks it raw literally means that they did not mix it in, and they drink it outright, they drink the syrupy concentrate, yatsa, they fulfill the obligation. Shasan b'vasachas, what if a person drinks all 4 parts at once? Yatsa, fulfilled the obligation. Hishke mehen levanov luvnei vesai, if he gave to drink to his household and to his children from that 4 parts, yatsa, he also fulfilled the obligation. So we have 3 different rulings as in connection with the 4 cups. But now the Talmud is going to explain what each one of them means. What does it mean, fulfill the obligation? Shasan chai yatsa, if he drank them raw, meaning he drank this wine concentrate on its own, he's fulfilled the obligation. Amar Rava says, Yedei yayin yatsa, he only fulfilled the drinking of the wine. Yedei cherus la yatsa, but he did not fulfill the expression of freedom. Question: since when is it that when you fulfill a mitzvah, you only fulfill something halfway? Suddenly over here, we have this concept, yatsa, you fulfilled it halfway. You only fulfill it all the way. Let's take any mitzvah. A mitzvah of mezuzah. You know what? I'm only going to write 6 lines out of the Shema. I'm not going to write the whole paragraph. I'm going to put 6 lines of it onto a mezuzah and put it out the door. Did I fulfill the mitzvah halfway? No. A tefillin is comprised of 4 compartments, 4 different parshas. If a person says, I'm only going to put 2 of them, did he fulfill the tefillin? No. We say he doesn't. Tzitzis. You know what? I'm only going to have strings on 3 corners, not 4. I'm going to get 3/4 of the amount of reward for putting on tzitzis. Do we say that? We don't say that either. What is this concept that we fulfill halfway? We fulfill the concept of drinking wine, but not the mitzvah of freedom. Is either all or nothing. What is this concept of halfway? Commentaries explain, and they give another insight. When it comes to the 4 cups of wine, we do have 2 components. There are 2 components, and this is going in continuation to the significance of the 4 cups of wine. There are 2 components to it. There's a concept of wine, that we must be drinking wine, and then there's a concept that we have to behave, not just metaphorically, but in body. We have to literally enjoy and demonstrate an expression of freedom. And therefore both are deeply essential, and both are deeply connected with the drinking of wine. And so if we don't do that, then yes, with wine specifically on the night of Pesach, we have this concept that we have to have both components. And one is not able to have that component of expression of freedom if they are drinking a syrupy substance, wine, without being watered down. By the way, the Rashbam, another Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir, I think his name is, he was a grandson of Rashi. He also has a commentary here. He basically tells us straight out, that is all mezigos. These were all the wine of those days. Nowadays, we don't have this concept of mixing wine. It's not a normal thing to have wine concentrate. So, just putting that out there. We continue. Shasam b'vasachas, if he drinks it all in one shot. Rav Amar yidei yayin yatsa yidei arba kaisis layatsa. Says Rav, if you drink all 4 cups at once, you fulfilled drinking wine, but you do not fulfill drinking 4 cups. Now we know this. The halachic implication is that if one drinks all 4 cups of wine at once, kiddush, makes it kiddush, that's the first cup, and he's decided, you know what? Let's go for it. 1, 2, 3, polish it, 3, 4, polishes it all down. All right, we're good. Let's go to sleep. Nope. Did not fulfill the obligation. Hishka livnei vana livnei vesei. V'hu de ishti ruva de kaisa. It's only provided they drinks most of the cup first. So we see that there's an obligation to drink the most of the cup. We continue going. Meisvei dal kaisa salol tzach sheben kadei revius echad chai ve'echad mazug echad chadash ve'echad yashan. We have this concept that you have to have at least a revius of wine. How much is a revius? Minimum amount. The widespread standard that we've accepted upon ourselves is from Rabbi Avram Chaim Na, and that's 2.9 fluid ounces. It is a revius yain, 2.9 fluid ounces. Some say it's 3. The highest amount is 5.9, but the common widespread is 2.9 fluid ounces. Is the minimum amount. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says, this is the last piece I'm going to focus on tonight. We're a little time restrained. Rabbi Yehuda says, Tzarech sheyehei b'tam omari yayin. I'm going to focus on this part. This is a very fundamental part in the Talmud. And that is, when we're talking about drinking the 4 cups of wine, it is required to have taste. Umari yayin. And it has to have the appearance of wine. Okay. Amar Rava. Rava says, My Tama de Rabbi Yehuda. What is the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda? What is the reasoning? For those who are following along, I just skipped 2 or 3 lines in the Talmud. I'm bringing into the bottom 3 lines. What is the reasoning why we need to have taste and more importantly, we have to have the appearance of wine? The reason given is because there is a verse in Mishlei, in Proverbs, that says as follows, Al tere yayin ki yis adam. Do not look at wine for its redness. For its redness. What's behind this verse? In Mishlei it tells us, Mishlei, Proverbs, is all about Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, giving us friendly suggestions. And so one of the friendly suggestions he gives to us is, you must ensure that you do not get too comfortable with having wine each and every day, every single day. Too much red wine is not good for you. It's not good for you. It will cause you to have redness, which means that you will be starting to see things in a different fashion, in a different light. That's the literal translation of this. But says the Talmud, what do we compare wine? Ki yis adam, because of its redness. Meaning, the specialty, the importance, and the royalty of wine is in its appearance and the fact that it has red coloring. In its redness. True royal wine is found in its appearance, in its redness. Red wine signifies royalty. Okay. So what is the halachic implication? What do we see from here? We see from here that the 4 cups of wine needs to be red. Red wine. And it has to be wine. Not mixed too much with water. That's based on the Rashbam. By the way, they say that wine today has so much water in it that if you add more water to it, then you cannot even say a bar priyagafen anymore. I just said that as a side note, but actually is an essential thing to remember by the seder night. We cannot mix wine with water. We cannot say, you know what, 4 cups of wine is too much for me, I'm going to dilute it with water. We cannot do that today. Back in the day, they had to do it because they had wine concentrate. These days, if you add water, there's so much water already in the wine that if you add it, you are diluting it to the point that it's not considered wine, to the point you cannot even make the blessing bar priyagafen on it. So what are the halachic implications? What if I drink white wine. Did I fulfill the obligation to drink 4 cups of wine if I had white wine? The Talmud tells us, based on this verse that we take very seriously, do not look at wine for its redness. That's quote unquote, which tells us that the importance and significance of wine is its redness. So if I drink white wine, did I fulfill my obligation? Machlekes, argument. So, I don't have it in front of me. I'm going to try to do it by memory. The Ramban, Nachmanides, tells us, no, exactly. Nachmanides rules out. The verse tells us red, that shows royalty, that is the significance, that's what it is. If you drink white wine, you have not fulfilled the obligation of the 4 cups. We must drink red wine by the seder. The Magen Avraham, another commentary, halachic ruling, rules that not necessarily. Because we should have red wine, but because of its significance. There's a significance in red wine. Why? The Magen Avraham tells us it is zeichel adam, to remember blood. We must remember everything that we do on the Seder night is symbolic. For example, we eat bitter herbs to remind us of the slavery. We dip karpas, the spring vegetable, we dip it into salt water to remind us of the tears. We have the charaises on the Seder plate. That is the red substance on the Seder plate to remind us of the bricks, the mortar, the bricks that were used. And therefore, says the Magen Avraham, we drink red wine to remind us of blood, of the slavery and the hardships associated with blood. What hardships do we have? So, the Medrash explains to us what type of a monster Pari really was. He was a terrible monster. Apparently, in the last year before the Jewish people were redeemed, Pari contracted a skin disease, and his absolutely insane doctors told him that the way to cure his disease is he needs to bathe every single day in the blood of newborn babies. So what did they do? So hundreds of babies were slaughtered, hundreds of newborn babies were slaughtered each and every day, decapitated, and squeezed out into a bathtub, and this horrible monster by the name of Pharaoh bathed in it each and every day. We had this concept. So in order to remember that, we have that concept as well. On a positive note, we have positive blood as well. We have someone here who, Baruch Hashem, thank God, celebrated the bris of a grandson. There was a blood of circumcision. Ve'erem is beiseses b'damayich, v'aymalach b'damayich chayi. And we actually say this verse in the Haggadah as well. God says, and I saw the appearance of you wading in blood, and this is the blood of redemption. This was referring to circumcision. We know that the Jewish people, they did not circumcise themselves. The Jewish people were not circumcised when they were slaves in Mitzrayim. The only people that were circumcised themselves in Egypt were the tribe of Levi. It was only when the Jewish people were redeemed and left Egypt, they were told they had to circumcise themselves in order to partake in the Paschal lamb. Kol arel lo. They were told that any person that was not circumcised could not partake in the Paschal lamb. So then they circumcised themselves, but until then they were not. So when they circumcised themselves, God says, this is the blood of redemption. This is the blood of redemption. The Pri Megadim over there on that page actually goes further on and says, another remembrance of dam, blood, was the plague of blood. So basically all of this is brought out that there's a significance of drinking red wine. So, again, and if I drink white wine, did I fulfill it or not? So, practical application. Says the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch. Says the Rebbe Shnezal Liadi in the Code of Jewish Law. He says as follows: Mitzvah lachzar achayayin edei. Alter Rebbe says it's a good thing to pursue red wine. It's a mitzvah. It's appropriate. It's ideal. It's the choicest thing to do is to have red wine for the 4 cups. However, the Alter Rebbe says you must try to, as much as you can, to have red wine. Im ein halavan meshuvach mimeno. If white wine is not better than it. Meaning, if you come along and say, you know what, we have a let's say a Farbrengen wine or a Rashi wine sitting there on the table. And then we have a wonderful Cabernet California Baron Herzog wine sitting to my left. It's white, but it's prestigious wine. No. We're not going to have the white wine from the Baron Herzog wine, California choicest Cabernet or Merlot wine. We're not going to have that. We're going to, not Merlot, that's red.
It's red.
1 second, Cabernet is also red. Give me Giorgio, something like that.
Pinot Grigio.
Yeah, that one.
Chardonnay.
Chardonnay is wine. It is white. Chardonnay. Moscato, we're not going to use Moscato. It's like a dessert wine. But let's say, I'm using Moscato. But anyways, Chardonnay.
The $5.99 red wine or the $40 white wine.
Exactly. See, I just embarrassed myself on Facebook. I know what Cabernet is. Chardonnay wine. Or you have champagne. Yeah, it's also white-ish. So, Moscato. You love Moscato. Me too. Movement. Okay, so it would be foolish to say, no. We have to have red wine. So you know what? I'm going to red wine, $5.99, and I'm not going to have Chardonnay. Says the Alter Rebbe. No. Oh, what are we talking about? We're only talking about that we should try to have red wine if it's important. But if you have something has more prominence, meaning, what do I mean by this? The only thing that's available is cheap red wine versus more prestigious white wine, then go with the white wine. You fulfill the obligation. Why should we still pursue red? Shenemar, and he quotes the Talmud, Altera Yain Kis Adam, from this verse in Proverbs that teaches us about the importance of red wine. Mashma shechashivusay shel yain kishu edom. The Alter Rebbe tells us, he interprets the verse as follows, that when the verse tells us, do not look at wine for its redness, that tells us that the importance, that what are we intimating from this? That the importance of wine is in its redness. Therefore, true importance of wine is red wine. So look for the Cabernet, look for the Merlot, look for the good red wines. Says Alter Rebbe, says Alter Rebbe, true, throughout the year there is no concept that you have to have red wine. There is none. Friday nights you could have white wine, no problem. We don't have this concept that you need to have red wine, says Alter Rebbe. Even on the festivals, even on Yom Tov, you don't have this concept. It's only a concept by the Pesach night. It's only the Seder night that we make this emphasis. Has to be red wine. True. Mikolmak and Bidal Kaisis Yesh Linhag, says Alter Rebbe, with the 4 cups on the Seder night, we do try our utmost to have red wine. Like those who say, because we have this concept, remembering the blood, because Pharaoh used to slaughter Jewish babies. Alter Rebbe finishes off this verse and says something really fascinating, which is eye-opening into the history and to the era which Alter Rebbe was at that time, when blood libels were still rampant and raging. In fact, blood libels went as early until the 20th century, 1910s. And the famous last blood libel took place in Russia with a Lubavitcher, a Chabadnik called Mendel Beilis, who was named after the Tzemach Tzedek. Menachem Mendel Beilis, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, was actually very instrumental in trying to helping him get acquitted. He was acquitted, and this was the last famous blood libel of the 20th century. By the way, what was a blood libel? When they were... Okay, never mind. Well, basically the blood libel, where they accused Jewish people of slaughtering Christian babies and mixing with the blood. It's funny, it's ironic. We are doing red wine. We are drinking red wine to remember the fact that their babies were slaughtered in Egypt. And now the anti-Semites, they threw it right back at us and says, exactly, you're drinking the blood of Christian children. So they threw it right back at us. The Alter Rebbe says, nowadays, he says, this is back late 1700s, he says, nowadays that there are many blood libels found, Nimnu, people have been refraining these days from taking red wine for Passover. Because they don't want to give any reasoning for anybody to come up with nonsensical but horrific blood libel that, red blood, and we get the idea. Thank God nowadays we don't live like that. Ironically, the Muslims have taken over this crazy idea. These last few years you could see that the Muslims are starting to do all these crazy propaganda videos about the Jews slaughtering Muslim babies. It's crazy. They've picked up on this nonsense. But we have this concept now. So basically that is the practical application. So we should try to have red wine. And obviously, if the only wine that's available, that's a good wine, is white wine, one could fulfill the obligation. But we should try our utmost to have red wine for the 4 cups. Last point, I'm going to make this very quick. And that is the bottom of the Talmud where it says, Taner Rabban in the next words, Hakol chayavin barba'a kaises halalu. Everyone is obligated in these 4 cups. Echad anashim, men. Echad nashim, women. Echad tinakos, children. Children are obligated in 4 cups of wine. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, V'chimatei elas yesh l'tinakos b'yayin. What benefit is it that you have children that you give them wine? Better that you give them nuts and sweets on Erev Pesach in order that they shouldn't sleep, they shouldn't fall asleep, and they should ask questions. Okay. What is this concept of we're giving kids to drink wine? Whoa, controversial here. We're giving kids to drink wine. So, we're not going to get into the whole discussion now because we ran out of time. I'm just going to quote you the Alter Rebbe that basically tells us that yes, we do involve the children when it comes to the 4 cups of wine. However, we don't talk about wine. The reason why we do this is for educational purposes. Chinuch, education, plays a very, very essential and pivotal role. I'm not just saying this as a teacher because I'm biased, but it really is. Chinuch, educating our children, is a very, very essential when it comes to Judaism, because when you train them young, then when they become bar mitzvah, when they become of age, they will, on their own, they will follow through and they will be following through on these things. And so therefore, like for example, fasting. Fasting, no one enjoys fasting. Fasting is not supposed to be enjoyable. And when it comes to Yom Kippur, we say, V'i nisem es nafshesechem, the Torah tells us, you should anguish, you should afflict yourselves by fasting. And yet, what do? We have this concept called Tanis Sha'is, the concept of fasting for a few hours. And the Alter Rebbe elsewhere says as early as 9 years old, it's important to get the kids, to get them accustomed to it. You skip breakfast that day. You eat lunch. You skip breakfast. You get them slowly. Now, it's not easy. Their stomachs will be growling. No one said fasting is easy. But then, when they get older, they say, oh, okay, there's this concept, fasting. I'm going to fast. Why? Because that's what's done. Which is, and everything. Tefillah, davening. We should try as much as we can, those who have kids over here, we should try the most that we can to bring our kids into shul, to hear whenever possible, to hear a reading of the Torah in shul, to listen to a kedusha, to be able to stand and respond amen to a kaddish being said, etc., etc. This is all for educational purposes, so that they will know what to do when they get older. The same thing says the Alter Rebbe, before I go on tangent, the same thing says the Alter Rebbe is, I just lost the place, trying to find it, here, even the small children, this is the last thing, I keep saying this is the last thing. This is the last thing, and with this we end. Af hakatanim, says the Alter Rebbe, even the young children, chayev avim lechancham b'mitzvos lashkosim kaises, their father is obligated to educate them in mitzvahs and to give them cups to drink. 4 cups of wine. Im kvar higiu lechinuch, if they already reached of age, that they are beginning to understand, why am I drinking wine? What is this? Etc. Etc. When they come to the age, it's appropriate. Okay. Therefore, we should make them accustomed, start training them, talking about the story going out of Egypt, to train them to listen to the Haggadah that's being said over the second cup, to educate them to listen to benching, grace after meals, and to say the Hallel, and to drink wine with the rest of us. In short, what I'm going to tell you right now, not necessarily do we actually mean wine. It could also be with grape juice. Grape juice, it's the same concept. It's a concept that we give them 4 cups of grape juice. It's the same idea. Now, they're not going to appreciate if we give them a cup of Cabernet. Drink. For young, that's usually an acquired taste. Usually when they're younger, it's disgusting. What are you giving me? The grape juice they appreciate. So that we absolutely give them 4 cups. So in conclusion, it's a holy cup. Very significant, 4 cups of wine. We give red wine. It's supposed to be a good wine. It's supposed to be enjoyable. That's the point. It's supposed to be enjoyable, these cups of wine. If you don't find Cabernet enjoyable and you find Moscato enjoyable, you drink the Moscato. I'm with you. I'm drinking Moscato because I personally don't handle it very well.
For 4 cups?
For
You drink Moscato?
I don't do well.
Sugar in
it. It is. Don't get me wrong.
No, I mean it's hard.
You're allowed to drink more. I read also that.
Yeah,
During the meal, you can have
absolutely.
the second cup.
That's the minimum.
That's
Right.
Some people say al tikri arba kosot ela arba cases, arba cases ela arba cases. It only works in Ashkenaz. Don't drink 4 cups of 4 cases. But anyways, that's for Purim. But the point is, yeah, absolutely, you could drink as many cups as you want. Just the cups that are designated, that must be drunk. And we give to the kids. We educate them as well. At any point in the Seder night, we should do that as well. Now, we also mentioned in passing, but of course, one must drink every single one of those 4 cups. Has to be at least a revius wine. We said that the widespread standard is 2.9 fluid ounces. So, if you're trying to get the minimum, or if your wives are trying to have the minimum, at least try to have a tumbler glass that is at least 3 ounces. 3 ounce cup, usually you can find them 3 ounce cups. 3 ounce cups. And if you choose to have a koshel elio, every time you drink the 4 cups, go ahead, make my day. Go ahead, make my day, and have your 16 ounce glass plus. But at least 3 ounces to be on the safe side. Because there are some opinions that the minimum amount could be over 5. So basically, your average Kiddush cup will do the job, but we have at least 3 ounces. Now, based on what we just discussed tonight, because one must have at least 3 ounces, that means that if you are drinking out of a 3 ounce cup, you need to drink the whole thing. Don't drink most of it, because if you just drink good enough, we'll just refill, top it off, and drink. No, you didn't drink the cup. If you have a 6 ounce, like a larger Kiddush cup, and you drink most of that, you probably fulfilled the obligation. But a 3 fluid ounce tumbler glass, and you drink most of that, you didn't drink your wine. So that's just important to know. If you're drinking one of those minimum cups, drink the whole thing down. That way you fulfill it. Men and women. Women are drinking 4 cups as well. And that is all that I'm going to share with you tonight, with the significance of the 4 cups. Next week again, just reminding you again, next week we will talk about Kairech, Passover signature sandwich. That's a wrap. That's the title I gave. And that's the last Thursday. The class after that's going to be just 3-4 days later on Monday night. The reason why we're doing that is because that week is the week of Pesach. Thursday night, instead of learning Talmud, we are supposed to be going home right away and checking for chametz, bedikas chametz. The Thursday after that is the night of Shvi Shal Pesach. We're supposed to stay up all night if we can. So therefore, Talmud class 1 in the morning right here at this time. Who's joining? Okay. And then...
Sure.
Don't say anything. and then
I'm not going to be here, so.
And then and then the Thursday after that, after Pesach, we will resume more to come. So that's that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you all for including. Before we go off tape, I do want to say thank you very much, Shmuel David, for tonight. We're in the season of his birthday. Yesterday, he was a happy English, and then next week, by the way, Thursday night, I think next week Thursday night is your Hebrew birthday, is the big 40. So we're going to celebrate that. We're going to have twice as much. I can say that in front of camera because they don't see what we have on the table. But L'chaim, everybody, have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.